All right. Good morning, Doug. We are here today with some Q&A from our viewers. Let's see. First question. What does Doug think of the monetary regression theorem, or why fiat currency is impossible according to Ludwig von Mises?
Well, I certainly agree that it's impossible, but I'll have to read about that particular theorem. I mean, absolutely, it is impossible. It won't work in the long run, but I'll have to do some research.
Okay, they did send us a link for this article that they think is very good from a guy I've heard about before recently. His name is Rafi Farber. So I have a link for you in the notes I sent you, and just if you have time and interest, take a look.
Yeah, very good.
All right. Next question. It'll never happen, but hypothetically, what would a conventional USA debt default look like and its impacts on society instead of doing it via inflation?
Well, that's a very interesting question because one of the things that I advocate is an actual default on US debt. My argument being that if a building is going to collapse, it's better to have a controlled demolition as opposed to let it fall randomly and unpredictably. However, if the US government defaulted on all of its bills and bonds and contingent obligations and so forth, at that point, what would happen? All the entire financial structure of the country would collapse. Insurance companies, corporations, the currency would collapse. It'd be worth nothing because debt would be worth nothing at that point, because the dollar would be worth nothing because the dollar is nothing but debt. So it would be real chaos. I've got to admit, real chaos. And chaos never ends well because there's always somebody that comes in to fill the power vacuum. So, but they painted themselves into a corner at this point. They can't default, so they're going to have to keep printing. But if they keep printing to keep it going, they're going to have to keep. I don't see any way out of this thing. We're headed for a real catastrophe. And the runaway inflation catastrophe may turn out to be worse than a deflationary catastrophe. But look at the good news. I always like to look at the other side of the coin. And the good news is that most of the real wealth, the farms, what remain of factories, the technology, the knowledge in people's heads, that's all going to be there. So it'll sort out.
I think that if there was a default, because so much U.S. debt is owned internationally and U.S. dollars are held as in reserves in central banks around the world, it wouldn't just be confined to the U.S. in terms of the financial catastrophe. It would be global.
Oh, global, totally global. And of course, it's not just the central banks and rich people who keep their money in dollars. It's the little people in these countries that have worthless blocked currencies that try to hoard some dollars. They're going to be screwed too. Jesus, what a titanic disaster. We'll see which titanic disaster it's going to be. It's going to be a titanic disaster or a gigantic disaster. I'm not sure yet.
All right. Next question. Is there any truth in saying that our fiat currencies, including the USD, are still somehow psychologically tied to gold, and therefore, so would need a new Fedcoin digital state currency, and by default, even crypto? What else is out there as a solid peg for valuations?
Well, that's actually a pretty profound question. I mean, what do you use as money? I think that's basically what that question boils down to. And I don't know what you can actually use as money besides gold, quite frankly. I mean, I see Bitcoin as a transfer mechanism, very valuable. That's what gives it its value. But gold is, I mean, what else would be a good money? Can't use cigarettes. Those are good in prison camps and war situations.
Which we want to avoid.
Yeah, can't use those little cowrie seashells. That was good for the Indians, primitive economy. It worked, kind of. So
what about the big stones in the South Pacific that were used?
I guess they kind of worked. And even if one of the stones was underwater in the ocean, it was still counted as an asset. Kind of interesting. I just don't know that there's any good substitute for gold with the the characteristics of a good money that we've talked about in the past. Nothing else really suits anywhere near as well.
I heard a theory recently that said something around the idea that Bitcoin could potentially be used as the way the Fed uses, what they call base money. That they could do fractional reserve banking off of it, but it could be used as base money. But I think that's only possible if the vast majority of it is in control of the central banks.
Yeah, and anyway, Bitcoin, as far as this is the reason why I was a late adopter of it. It took me a long time to figure out what its actual value was. And frankly, I don't see any value except being a transfer mechanism. And the value of gold does that, of course, but it has other value because it's one of the 92 naturally occurring elements. So maybe I'm missing something again.
Well, the scarcity and store of value that Bitcoin, I think, provides is substantial too, just because of its natural, it has its natural scarcity tied to it. There can only be so many. They are, it's fungible in the same way that gold is, so that's good. But you can know who owns what, and you can't, I mean, all the games that are played sometimes with these vaults and saying, yeah, no, we have your gold, but it's unallocated, and so they end up having, selling it 5 times. That can't really happen with Bitcoin. I guess they probably could find a way to make that happen with financial instruments on top of Bitcoin, but still. Anyway, yeah, gold is a thing, and I mean, I don't know if have you heard about? I did see some headline a couple of months ago about that central banks were in the process of trying to accumulate more gold globally, and which would indicate their worries about fiat currencies. I don't know if you saw anything about that.
Yes, I know there was a news item that came out about how the Hungarian central bank is buying a lot of gold, and of course, the Chinese and the Russian central banks have said that they've been buying a lot of gold for years. So sure, but scarcity itself. That's important, but there are a lot of things that are scarce, like let's say bottle caps, okay? They're kind of scarce. Really, you don't see them laying around everywhere, but could we use them as money? Yeah, their scarcity alone wouldn't cut it.
Very good point. Very good point. Okay, next question. They'd like two of our viewers here would really like to know what you think about Saint Kitts. Now, we were talking offline about Saint Kitts the other day and the passports, and so what do you think about it in general? And what's the upside? What's the downside?
Well, I've been to Saint Kitts and been all around the island, and it's not the high life. Quite frankly, it's quiet, and there's a few restaurants that you can go to. Okay, the people you're going to socialize with are local islanders or a few expats that are there for God knows what reason. I don't know, and their passport. So it wouldn't be my first choice as a place to live. Although, look, here I am right now, and for the last year in the middle of nowhere. Well, not really, but in Uruguay, and I don't care. So I guess I could live on St. Kitts as easily as I live in Uruguay, quite frankly. All right, so maybe that's not such a downside. But the reason people are interested in it is because of their passport. And as we were talking about yesterday, at some point, these big governments might just decide not to recognize the passports of little governments. And of course, the fact that you've got to have your COVID passport and all that type of thing adds into this complication. Nothing against St. Kitts, it's a good alternative, but it's better to get a passport from a real country.
Yeah, it does seem like these countries where they offer these economic citizenships, especially these minor island countries, that they're, I mean, it's a huge part of driving their economy is selling these things. And I mean, I think actually as part of it, is it St. Kitts where you're paying into the, they call it the sugar fund, as part of it. And the thing about the sugar fund is the sugar fund is actually, um, it's a replacement because the island used to produce sugar,
Yeah.
but they no longer produce sugar. And the idea of this income that they get from these passports is supposed to replace the actual production of something that they used to have. Uh, and which is, it seems like a bad situation, which makes it pretty unstable. If those if passports, that business dries up, they get too much pressure on them for one reason or another, they could easily pass a law that identifies all economic passport citizens as second class citizens. I mean, not allow you to renew your passport. I mean, there's all kinds of potential risks there, but it has been a decent passport for people for the last, decade for sure.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the problems is that these backward little third world countries are always mismanaged, almost always mismanaged. So what have they done? I mean, St. Kitts is bankrupt, actually. They've pissed all that money away. I mean, it hasn't been sequestered or saved or anything. It's been, who knows what they've pissed it all. It's basically been stolen, I'm sure. That's what usually happens. So it'll end badly.
Well, they also, I heard they have guaranteed employment for locals. So if you go into a local cell phone shop, there's a person who might have been otherwise working in the sugar industry who is there just to open the door for you, and so the government requires the employment of individuals. And so a lot of the funds, the sugar funds, from what I understand, actually go to for make work jobs for the islanders.
Well, that's interesting because, of course, if you wanted to start a business for some reason in St. Kitts, uh, it, many of these countries require 50% local ownership. Oh, and who wants to have a local partner who like that?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right. Next question. Has Doug had any experience in storing gold in either Singapore or Switzerland? If so, how was the process?
Well, I'm much more familiar with Switzerland, and it's not practical at this point because you can't, I don't believe that an American, and it's just Americans basically, can even open up a safe deposit box in a Swiss bank these days. They don't want your business. You're just too much trouble, too much of a liability. Uh, so forget about storing gold in Switzerland. I don't know about how it's working in Singapore these days, but the empire has its tentacles out everywhere, and it doesn't want to see you do that. So that's all I can say about it right now. What do you know, Matt? Anything else?
The only thing I don't know about what they allow or not, but I have a friend who has had gold in Switzerland for decades. And he has literally a ton of gold in a Swiss vault. And maybe because of timing or whatever, it's sort of unknown. It's not in the system. It's not tied to his name or whatever, within US records. And he always assumed that if he needed it, he could go get it, or he could have it shipped to wherever he wanted to go in the world. But when COVID came around, I remember him telling me, he said, I don't even know if I can get it. I don't know if I can get it here, or get it here without substantial cost to me, because it would have to show up in the system, and there'd be consequences maybe about that, tax wise or whatever else. So the strange thing is, you have
Not accused of money laundering. I mean, that's
exactly. And so part of the thing is, you think of these safe in the before times, as you say, having assets stored in secure locations around the world seemed like the obvious correct idea. But as travel is restricted, as controls are put in place, it seems like that is not the foolproof plan it once was.
That's right. I mean, travel is horrible. Tom Dyson, in his blog today, he took his family to England because his mother died or whatever. And what he noted was that even though the plane that they were on, flying from New York to Heathrow, was 90% empty, so there's very little travel going on, still it took 90 minutes, even though all their papers were in order, 90 minutes to get through immigration. And he mentioned that it's a scandal in Great Britain now that most people are having to wait 7 hours standing in line at Heathrow. That's what he said. That's boots on the ground information. So no, traveling is a nightmare today. I dread going back to the empire in a couple of weeks.
Well, the empire eventually may come to you, Doug, you know, the way we think we're expanding. So, okay, let's see. Next question. Can you ask Doug if black markets tend to be a leading indicator for inflation compared to traditional markets? It seems retail is okay at having a set price with no inventory, but when it comes to items that are scarce, the black market or secondary market seems to price in the scarcity rather quickly.
Yeah, well, just before we started the show today, Matt, we were talking about the possibility of a crack up boom. And I think we're actually going to see one, as do you. And when we have a crack up boom, what happens is that everybody is spending money like it's going out of style, because it is going out of style. So they're trying to get rid of it for something, anything that's got some kind of value. Yeah, I think we could easily head into that, quite
Yeah.
frankly. This is going to be a catastrophe. The more I think about the possibilities, the scarier it gets, quite frankly.
Well, you know, we've been expecting financial catastrophe of one form or another for a long time. So, like that part, I feel like I'm reasonably well prepared for. It's the other parts. It's the vaccine passports and the social disorder and the woke mobs and things like that that worry me most, because at least my mind has been oriented to the financial cataclysm must come at some point. It's coming.
Yeah, but it's like Clausewitz said, no battle plan survives the firing of the first shot, or as Mike Tyson put it more succinctly, everybody's got a plan until they get hit in the mouth.
It's true. That's true. That's true. Let's see. Um, let's see. Does Doug and John, you have any plans? And I think we've answered this question before, but do you have any plans to give Uncle Maurice his own book?
Yeah, well, we've talked about, John and I have talked about that. And actually, we've talked about giving a Rainbow her own book too. The world,
Badass.
not to be PC or anything like that, but I think the world could use a feminine hero in the Randite as opposed to the woke tradition. Yeah, we'd love to do all that stuff. But the current series, we've got a total of 7 books planned. And where are we going to get the time to write them all, plus others? It's a problem.
That's true. So sometime next month from our conversation we had yesterday, it seems as though both you and John will be staying in my place here in Colorado for a night. And I was wondering if, John doesn't seem to like the public eye so much, but it would be really fun to do a live stream with you and John and really let people who are big fans of the book ask you questions about it, because we get them all the time. And, and also I'm personally curious about the process. You guys are like, what, being good writing partners seems like it's so rare, rare to find. So if you can convince John to do that, that would be fantastic. I know our viewers would love it.
That's a good idea. We'll do that. And it is hard to find a good writing partner for many, many reasons, because I've tried it with several other guys. So good idea.
Great. Okay. Doug, how much gold and silver is too much to hold at home? We actually talked about this yesterday too.
Yeah. It's funny. After we were talking about it, I thought about that Keanu Reeves movie. Is it John Wick?
Yeah.
One of his characters. Well, anyway, perhaps I'm conflating that character with another, but it was Keanu in a movie. He's an assassin. And in his house, it appears that he had, under a concrete floor he put in himself, he's got all of his gold and guns and extra IDs and stuff like that. And you'd never find it because it's under a concrete floor that he had to break open with a sledgehammer.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, that was it. So actually, that's the best way to do it because you know you buy a whole bunch of stuff, and maybe the guy that installs the safe is kind of making a note in the back of his mind, figuring, this could be an easy piece of low-hanging fruit. Just so I think you got to be I think you got to be a do-it-yourselfer if you've got significant assets.
How much is too much?
Yeah, well, that's kind of a cosmic problem, isn't it? You know, I think it was Mae West said something like too much of a good thing is great, or something like that. I don't know. I don't know. You know, I bought a few valuable things myself over the course of time. When I felt flush and bought something that, you know, is obviously valuable. And I actually think, you know, is it idiotic for me to display this in my house? Because, you know, one girl tells another, and I might be actually inviting a thief, which would present other problems because then you got to deal with them, and that then somebody might get killed. Who knows?
Yep.
So hopefully not. I wouldn't be me, but you never know. So I don't know. It's a good question. Maybe look. It's best to maintain the attitude of a Taoist monk. You want to have all this stuff, but not be owned by it. So if you lose it, you're unhappy, but life goes on. I'd say get as much as you can, frankly. Too much of a good thing is do it, but it's a problem. Listen, that's the world we live in today. I mean,
I think that the John Wick style thing is an important piece of it, though, that it's got to be, if you're going to keep anything of tremendous value in your home, it needs to be a secret. It needs to be not known, and it needs to be not knowable. And even having it as safe, as you know, I have a safe in my house, which is great. But obviously, if someone were to guess where my valuables were, they're in the safe. I mean, it's pretty obvious that's where they are. So that, it slows people down, but it's not going to stop anybody who's determined, you know, to take it. So.
No, it's not. In fact, there was a video done years ago, published by my friend Peter Lund, who ran Paladin Press. Peter died recently, but the name of the video was called B&E, from A to Z. And in that, Peter and a Confederate tried to break and enter into various types of devices and buildings and showed how you do it and all this type of thing. And the conclusion they came to is that really nothing's safe. It's just a matter of the time and to some degree the technology that you're up against, but nothing's safe. And if the Red Army invades, that's doubly true.
Yeah. Okay. What's Doug's take on paper commodities like GSCI? Any suggestions for young starting investors on getting started in real commodity investments? I'm skeptical of anything paper and prefer cash flowing assets.
Yeah, that's a good thought. When it comes to that type of thing, the only thing I have a commodity futures account, which are relatively hard to open these days. And you shouldn't open them unless you're already pretty experienced, because the odds of you blowing yourself up are really, really high. But that's the only involvement that I have. So I don't feel I can give advice on it. What do you think, Matt? Do you do that or not?
You know, I really don't. Since I decided after my gold futures near disaster back in 2008 that I was not suited for that type of investment. That's what I learned.
No, a man's got to know his limitations.
That's right. That's right. Okay. Does Doug find the power outages in Texas a couple months back to be suspicious? It seems reminiscent of what was happening in California leading up to the Enron scandal. Power infrastructure is one of the few things built to last and withstand fairly extreme weather conditions. My friend used to work on wind turbines in Colorado, and he says they're built to still operate even if ice is in the turbines.
Yeah, good question. I don't know. It is suspicious, let's say that, but you know, I hate to talk about anything like that without having actually first talked, to guys that are actually putting up those lines and repairing them and that actually know something about it. Because what do most of us know? All we know is what we hear on TV or some reporter has written down who doesn't know anything in the paper.
Yeah.
Well, no, it is suspicious, but don't know.
Yeah, it seems to me it's probably more likely it's simply mismanagement by the authorities who are responsible for it, and too many points of potential failure, and one bad thing happens, and you have especially with electrical grids. I mean, they have to maintain a certain level of energy constantly flowing through them, or the entire thing can break. I mean, and break for a long time. So they are complicated systems, and there's a lot of mismanagement in this world, right?
Well, and as the state gets bigger and interferes with more things, um, look, we live in an ultra complex society where if, we've gone a long way from the time of Shakespeare, where, what was it, Richard III, for the lack of a nail, the shoe was lost, lack of a shoe, the horse was lost, and the kingdom was lost. And things are much, much more interdependent than they were in Elizabethan England. So, yeah, things could fall apart real easy.
Yeah, cascading failures in complex systems should be expected at some point. It's hard to know when, but it's just, especially when our drive is for constant and efficiency improvements. How do we make things more efficient? And that often involves greater complexity. And you just can't even understand. It's hard to even know where the failure points are in these complex systems.
Right. I mean, some years ago, just-in-time inventory became the fashion. So nobody keeps inventory because they expect that the supply chain will get it there to you right away. And I haven't emphasized enough recently my belief, one of the few laws I believe in, the second law of thermodynamics, which is to say everything winds down and falls apart unless you have active inputs to keep it up. And we may not be getting enough of those, so things will fall apart.
Agreed. Okay, let's see. Has Doug read Julian Assange's Conspiracy as Governance essay from the early 2000s? And if so, was it an influence on his idea for Charles Knight's Paladin Network in Book 3?
No, it wasn't. I'll have to read that now that you mentioned it, though.
I included a link for you so you can check it out at your convenience. And actually, we should. I really want to ask John about the development of the crypto network within that book, because I know that he was the primary driver of understanding the technology and integrating it properly. And I'm very interested. And I think it's very, very, very interesting. So,
well, that was John's baby. And other things that were John's, ideas that were great ideas were the Sibylline drug and so forth.
yeah,
So
I know that's remarkable. Maybe he had been experimenting with mushrooms before that. Who knows? I don't want to suggest he would do anything illegal, of course, but what does Doug think about monetary systems like kinesis that attempt to wed allocated bullion to crypto that can be easily spent via debit card? The idea being to force the issue of using sound money instead of fiat. I'm not sure if you're familiar with kinesis or not, but actually, I don't know if you remember, but that young man from Uruguay who came to visit you and have lunch with you, he was working on that project. That's what his job was. And when he went back to Dominican Republic, that's what he was doing. I spoke with him after.
okay,
It's a gold-backed cryptocurrency, and it's interesting because the primary bet is on gold. But the problem, some of the problems with gold is that it is more difficult to transfer, obviously, than using your Visa card or something. So they're trying to bridge that gap. But the problem I had with it wasn't there a company I don't know if it was called Bit Gold or something like that in, the 90s and early 2000s that, the feds went after hard
Hmm.
what they're doing. I don't know if you recall that or not.
Yes, it was called, I think it was called BitGold. And actually that was run by an MD named, God, I'm trying to remember his name because, I spent a day hanging around with them. And yeah, that could have been $1 billion enterprise, but yeah, it fell apart. The problem with these things is Eugene Jackson, was that his name? Anyway, I think it was, come to think of it. But the problem is third party risk. I mean, it's even if you trust the person who's storing the physical gold, that's great, but that's a big hurdle to overcome. What if somebody steals it all from him? You know, I mean, if you got, in a place that's not Fort Knox, you get a gang of criminals or, some unemployed mercenaries, and they just decide this is some low hanging fruit. Let's go for it. Now what happens?
Exactly. And the fickle finger of the government also, I think was his biggest problem.
That's right. Yeah. So those are good idea, problematical.
All right. I know we only have another 3 or 4 minutes before you got to go. So let me just get a couple more questions in. I think this one is interesting because it relates to me. How did you meet Matt, and how did he get lucky enough to be able to create this project with you?
Well, the project that we have now was your idea. I wouldn't have thought of it, frankly. I mean, it's kind of not in my ken. And we met in Buenos Aires in the early days of the Estancia de Kapajate project.
That's right. I was one of the first buyers. In fact, I posted in our so I launched, I'll get into this really quickly. I launched a membership program using YouTube's paid services where you can pay YouTube, and you get basically a little more access to some of the content we produce. We'll probably do some members only live streams, so I have a smaller group that'll be more intimate and easier to interact with. And the primary reason I'm doing that is most people know, we run 0 ads on this channel at all. We don't like ads. We just think it interferes with things. But I'm told that may even suppress our channel growth because YouTube's not making money on us. But regardless, I launched that because I'm interested in making sure that what we're doing is actually considered useful by people. Like if we are, I mean, we're lifelong business people. If we are in fact creating value in the world, then value tends to be reciprocated. So without that clear feedback loop, it's hard for me to know for sure whether or not we're doing the right thing. I mean, maybe this is a misallocation of our time and energy. And although we both get some enjoyment out of it, we could get enjoyment out of a lot of things. So I set up this membership program. And if you really like what we're doing, if you feel like it's important, I encourage you to join the membership program. There's different levels from $10 a month all the way up to $100 a month. We've got a lot of people already join it, which is certainly gratifying. And for those who are totally against giving YouTube any money whatsoever, I added at some members' request a Bitcoin address where you can send a donation if you'd like. Now, I bring all that up because within that, I posted some pictures that are members only pictures that you can see in YouTube, old pictures of some pictures of you and I, Doug, from Albania and from Uruguay, and some others that are on there. And I also posted a picture of me holding my son standing by the plot lot marker for the lot that I bought in Kapajate. I think it was G02, I think is what it was. I just looked at it when I posted it. So yeah, early days of Kapajate, and there was nothing there at that time. Just a couple of signs in the dirt, really marking lots. That's all there was. But
yeah, it was terrifying when the golf course was being built because they turned that nice field into something that looked like the Sahara Desert. And I said, "What kind of havoc have I wreaked here?" It worked out though. But
it did work out. And I think one other question someone asked is, hey, with this, maybe projects like Kapajate, which you considered a failure at one point, I think, or disappointment at least, maybe the things like that really are a matter of timing, because, now more than ever, people are really looking for a safe haven. And, that Kapajate sounds very interesting to a lot of people, and I would encourage people to check it out. It's a L'Estancia de Kapajate is what the development is called. And, if you just even Google Kapajate, CAFAYTE, you'll find your way there. And by the way, do you know I owned that domain too, and I sold that to David Glond, kapajate.com. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, all right. I know we got to go because you got to get on another call to find out about an investment opportunity that's being presented to you. So I guess we'll just leave it at that for now, and then we'll be back on Monday.
Okay, and do have a good weekend. Forget the safe weekend bullshit, but have a good one.
Yes, make it count. All right. Thank you, Doug. Appreciate it.
Okay.